All right, I am super excited to be moderating this webinar on mobilizing employees. I have two dynamos here on the webinar. Oliver Dohn is here in person, and Tom Moore is on the call. So I think the best way we should do this is we should each, the three of us, do a short intro, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, and then I have a set of prepared questions to just trigger conversation. But the goal here is to have a 15-minute long conversation about mobilizing employees.
Great.
Maybe you start, Tom?
Sure, I will do. Hi, everyone. So my name is Tom. I work with a company called Mandala. Mandala, we are innovation, or we are conscious innovation partners. So we help organizations with innovation. Innovation could be any type of generation of value. But it always has to be conscious. So the focus here is, yes, creating value, creating profit, but doing it in a way that generates social value at the same time. I'm from the UK, but based in Brazil. I'm based in Sao Paulo. Mandala is started in Sao Paulo in 2006, but we now have various offices around the world, but we're a very small boutique, 40 people. And that's really it, man. We're very much focused on helping organizations to understand the shift of mindset that needs to take place. Some of our clients are at the start of their journey. Some of them have been on the journey for a while, but always there's the next step to take. And that's it. We can help with working on purpose and defining a purpose, discovering what a purpose is. But then also, and this is perhaps the slight shift that we're seeing these days, is that increasingly more organizations already understand this. They already get the idea of purpose, but it's the question of purpose activation. It's a question of how do we implement it? How do we make sure that this thing is not just a phrase on the wall, but it's something that we live every day, defining us, taking our hard decisions. And that's really the focus of our work these days, of purpose activation and helping organizations with this.
Super, great intro, Tom. Thanks so much for being here and making the time. And I'm privileged to have not only on the webinar, but also in the same room, Oliver. So if you can introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much, Scott. So hi, everyone, also from my side. My name is Oliver. I'm actually an industry person. I've been working now for 27 years in industry. Very different ones, multinational companies like General Motors, Bombardier, but also family-sized companies in my past. And in the last 4 years, I've had the pleasure to actually work in a Swiss company called Earlycon, and we made in one of the divisions quite a significant transformation. We had a situation 4 years ago where we had the segment pretty much underperforming and a lot of the plants underutilized. Customers not very happy, employees were pretty much in a narrow place with a lot of short work and a lot of dissatisfaction. The metrics at that time didn't really show great enthusiasm for the company, and we had the chance to transform that in the last years, and then came out really in a very good way, pretty successful. So I'm very happy to be here and talk about that, and looking forward to this discussion.
Thanks so much, Oliver. And just a quick intro from my side. So Scott Goldner, lead the individual and organizational development work here at the Do School. And I feel like a big part of really what I do is coach individuals, teams, and organizations through transformation. And so we have this set of building blocks that we're iterating on. And I think the mobilizing employees is a super important one because it's really hard to do. And it's something you can't let your sights off of, because it's so important to make sure that everyone has access to the transformation, can participate, feels included, and is working together towards it. So anyway, enough about me. Let's kind of begin the discussion. Let's dig a little further. So both of you, for folks new to organizational transformation, why do you think it's so important to mobilize employees to empower change, to drive change?
Tom, you want to start?
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Well, I mean, these are the times that we live in, aren't they? I mean, you can't really avoid change today. I mean, change is the normal. You know, we talk about the VUCA world, and, you know, volatility and ambiguity and complexity, and that is the new normal. And so in a way we can think about change being a constant. We have to assume that for any organization, big or small, change is this thing that we all need to work with. And it is something that we're all dealing with, and we need to learn. And this is the great thing, is that it is a kind of a, even though it's complex, it is a competency. You can learn this stuff. You know, I think that's an important thing of like, transformation is very messy and very difficult and involves human beings and is not an easy thing to do. But you can guide it. You can move things in certain ways based upon a set of principles and ways of doing things. So it's important, yeah, for that reason, that change is a constant and transformation is like a competency that every organization needs today. And considering where we are, you know, with you know, our digital lives and our experience between the virtual and physical worlds, that's only going to increase, added complexity. This is going to continue, and so this competency of being able to change effectively isn't going anywhere. It's only going to increase.
Fantastic. I totally agree. Anything you want to add?
I fully agree to what Tom was saying. And for me, very clearly, the times where large, very complex organization can be driven by one person on the top, where everybody's directing everything, absolutely over. And in the times today, we need the competence of every single employee. And without an involvement and engagement of everyone, which is conscious with mindset change towards that, the change is important and good, and it has to be good for the employees, it has to be good for the overall, and here purpose really comes into place. You just cannot compete. You will not be able to handle the change because you can never foresee from the top all the kind of things which try to pop up, which disturb, which would be roadblocks if employees would not solve them self-drivenly. So creating an engagement and empowered organization is key in making a transformation really happen. And as Tom was already saying, I mean, today change is constant. Yep. If I look back, I mean, in my industry experience, honestly, my red thread in my life is change. I always had to do some transformational tasks, but in the past, it was parts of the organization which had to change towards a certain mandate. Today, it's mostly the total organization structure because the environment is changing so fast. And that requires a much more overall agile organization. Yeah. In parts in the past, you know, when I was working in car industry, for example, it was lean manufacturing, and it was the constant change in lean manufacturing management, where unfortunately not enough people understood that it should be changing all across the organization. It left it to the parts and manufacturing, which left that agile to some ways, but did not connect it to the customers and properly along the value chain.
Fantastic. And I'm going to break the rule, I guess, of sort of facilitating and moderating. And
break the rules.
I just, you guys are too interesting. I definitely want to contribute and also highlight some of the smart things you guys said. So I love what you said, Oliver, about like constant change. It's like the new normal is, instead of thinking about change management, it's really about preparing everyone for ongoing transformation. So it's an ongoing process and becoming comfortable and becoming an agent in that. I want to emphasize that. And I love what you said, Tom, really about this notion of allowing everyone to participate, right? Because there's so many opportunities for people to participate in the change process. And I also love what you said, there's so many opportunities through this engagement to learn, to inform and iterate and develop the transformation. And last thing, not to be a fatalist, but the price to pay if you don't do it is terrible, right? The people you don't engage are the ones who could really disrupt the transformation as it's, you know, developing and what it could be.
Yeah, and people honestly today have a different aspiration too. Young people of today mostly want to work for a company which is purpose, want to be able to engage and ask for that. Yeah. And if you don't utilize all their capabilities to that and give them the chance to contribute, very often they work with their feet. And in this world, we cannot just afford to lose this kind of people who actually want to engage.
Yeah. That's a perfect segue. Go ahead, Tom, please.
No, just what Oliver said. I think that's making the connection between purpose and change. is that not only is change the new normal, it's also that in this changing environment where things are complex and changing the whole time, having a purpose, having this sense of very clear sense of why we're doing this, and a sense of this guiding North Star for us, that helps you change better.
Yeah.
Because you, instead of being caught up in this completely not knowing where you're going, amidst all of that, you have this almost sort of calm serenity of like, we have this North Star, and you apply this North Star at critical moments, difficult moments, where you have to make a decision between X or Y. Is this thing or that thing? It's like, where we're going to go here. And so sometimes I think we need to link the points between, let's make sure that the purpose conversation is over there and the change and agile conversation is over here. We need to connect them, and we need to recognize that purpose can be this facilitator of change and a facilitator of being agile as well. It's like in the moments where you need to make a decision, the right decision quickly, you have this purpose which is helping you to do that. So just trying to make those points clear, because occasionally the conversations take place in different parts of the room, and it's important that, you know, put purpose there. It helps us with change. It helps us with agile. It's part of the same thing in a way.
I love that. So it's almost like the purpose is the constant within all this transformation. How do we lean on that? How do we use that for direction? So to connect also to this kind of this human level and this identification with purpose. So I'm just going to read so I don't get names wrong. In another conversation we had with Yossi Sargent from Task Force, he stressed the importance of engaging employees, as you both indirectly said, engaging the employee as human beings with different interests, problems, etc., to activate purpose. So the question here is, how do you, especially given different roles and structures and teams in the department, how do you engage and connect on a human level despite those, traditional barriers? And how do you kind of scale that sort of human connection? So maybe in short, how do you mobilize employees, but how do you really take into account that human individual factor? Easy question.
Oliver, you want to go, or I can go?
Absolutely. I've been working on different cultures. I'm German by birth, and I've been working now also a big portion of my time in Italy. I've been working in India and China. So culture definitely plays a big role in actually how you address the people. Nevertheless, I think in all of the cultures, it's important that you, in your role as a leader, that you show respect. And I think that starts with listening to people. Not judging when you come into a different situation. But very often you're challenged to make a transformation and to make a change. There's an expectation by another CEO, by a board, to actually improve a situation which is good even further, or to find a different direction, or to pull a company out of a very difficult situation. And really it's showing respect for these people. Not coming in and knowing everything already from the start on how to change that. Taking, even though it might be an urgency, really to listen and to try to understand. And then I think important is when you go through with what makes this company and what has made that survive, and very often over hundreds of years or longer than 100 years. I think it's important to understand what makes the DNA of this company. And again, we are with people. And for me, the point of hierarchy doesn't really play any role. For me, there's no difference in importance between any kind of people in the organization. The only difference is the role you have to play. So I think arrogance is the biggest enemy of this kind of thing. You have to have a human connection by just talking naturally with everybody around. I think there are tools to this which you can use to make it easier. Communication, both directions, is very important. Open door is very important, kind of diamond slice meetings where you allow all kind of people having contact with. Also you as the CEO is important, because the people need to feel emotionally connected in any kind of way. I don't think anybody just works for the name or even the written purpose of the company somewhere. People work for people, and they want to feel the emotions of these people. And also, I believe as a person, also as a leader, you don't have to be fearful to be perfect all the time. I think being vulnerable, being wrong is actually a good thing. As long as we work with humans, not with artificial intelligence, that is clearly a point which distinguishes us. We would not, if you look, I mean, look in the antique, all the gods which were there in the Greek and the Roman mythology, they were all imperfect. And the people loved them and they followed them for their imperfection. We are not made to look for perfection. I think accessibility, being you, being authentic makes the whole difference.
Super answer. Anything you want to add to that, Tom?
Well, apart from super answer as well. Yeah, I love that stuff. I love that idea of not trying to be perfect, because that is human. I think that idea of coherence as well. I think of just making sure that however you're going about things, we need to enjoy diversity. We need to celebrate diversity. There can't be one way of doing things. And I think that sort of idea of sort of coherence, organizational coherence, so you're sort of being true to yourselves, I think is really important. Yeah, I mean, you know, we were just in a workshop this morning here where we were just talking with people about like how you go into one organization and you know, they might be similar types of organizations, the same kind of industry or same kind of size, and one is sort of like, you know, it's just a bit dead and there's lacking in energy, and then you go to another and it's really sparky and there's people connected and the information flows and communication is way better, and it's just like, what is it? What's that magic that shifts from one to another? And I think we need to be careful not to be too prescriptive. You know, it's like there's one way of doing things. I think it's much more about each organization trying to find their own way that works for them, for their moment, for their situation, and being confident with being authentic, you know, and having that as part of it. Another thing I just wanted to throw in terms of communication, which is something that we've been using quite a lot in our consulting work, is the idea of radical candor, which is exactly that idea of you need to show that emotional connection. So I think maybe Brazilians don't have a problem with this, but it's a little bit different in Europe. The Brazilians are happy to bring all of their emotions to work, so there's no problem there. But like in some parts of the world, you know, people find it difficult to bring their emotions to work. But the emotional side, it plays a part of our work as well. We need to, when we think about relationships and communication, we need to care for each other. We need to go beyond just the pure step-by-step work process. This is what we need to get done. You need to open up and have that emotional intelligence and that connection. So there's that side of radical candor. But then the other side of radical candor is about you need to say the right thing at the right time. Sometimes you need to say something that's very difficult. You need to, with that person that you've built that trust and that connection with, you need to say very difficult things. You need to have those difficult conversations. And so we need to be careful as well not to hide things, not to not say things. We need to be able to express those difficult conversations and be prepared to have those difficult conversations. But the basic idea of radical candor for somebody who doesn't know it is exactly that. You sort of have this 2 by 2, and you need to kind of care about the person emotionally, but then you also need to be damn tough at the right time. But the two together create this mix, which allows for hopefully a better form of communication, better forms of giving and taking feedback, and overall, you know, more positive, productive relationships.
Super tool. Sounds like you.
Yeah. I can only agree. I didn't mention that, but I'm thankful that you really mentioned that. Emotional connection and empathy is actually a word which we don't use too often. You know, I heard years back about leadership style being esoteric because you actually dealt with people in an emotional way. I think there's no other real way, because you have to care. I mean, when you educate your children, the children are ready for the change because they know that you love them and you know that you do even the challenging things in their interest. You might have difficult discussions, especially in puberty, but again, you have to go through these kind of things. And everybody who's a parent knows that very well. But in the end, a leadership role is nothing different. You have the responsibility for the people, and you learn, hopefully, in different leadership ranks that these difficult conversations you've been talking about, Tom, are absolutely a must. If you avoid them, and if you say you've done a great job, I'm really happy about everything you've done, and he knows it's not true, and because I've been smirking differently and I'm giving the task to somebody else, and every time he will know anyway, and he feels that I'm dishonest and don't support him. I think as long as you give criticism in the real interest of the person, then it's credible and the people really take you on. I found that so often. And conflict, the same thing. It's so important that you actually have a culture of conflict where people can speak up from all directions, that they're not beaten down by that. And not only because you're the boss, you're automatically right. And you need to install a culture where people dare to speak up and have that conflict. Else you direct an organization of Yasers who in the end let you run all against the wall. And because you might not see as the leader that single thing. You need to educate this conflict culture, and only it happens if the people reduce fear. And therefore you have to make sure that people know that everything which you do is in the end in the long-term interest of them.
Totally agree. I tell you, I wish I had the two of you in this topic for a much longer format. So I have the tough task of trying to keep us. No, this is rich and perfect. What I'm going to do is just one quick comment to tie us into the next question. That'll be our last sort of specific question, and then give each of you a chance to kind of close it out with recommendations or your final thoughts. So one thing that I want to highlight that's hard about this mobilizing employees is the human side, is that everyone learns and everybody responds differently and needs time, but there's also an urgency to transform. So I think the real magic comes from how do you reconcile those two things? How do you give people time and allow them to really be participating and to learn and to grow into the transformation while still keeping things moving? It's a challenging but obviously doable thing to do. And with that in mind, we tend to refer to this building block mobilizing employees as movement building, so really building a movement. And I'm just curious what you think of that kind of connection and how you build movement within organizations you've worked for.
Can we go ahead this time?
Sure. I mean, in terms of giving time to people, I think that, I mean, one thing, again, coming back to the coherence point, I think setting the expectations correctly and try to, for the people who are leading this process to be very clear around that we have time, that we're, you're not going to change behaviors completely from one day to another. Famously, to change a behavior, you need whatever it is, a couple of months at least to sort of, to make those changes. So any kind of behavior change at the individual level, and then, you ramp that up to the organizational level and it's multiplied, it's going to take time. So you need to sort of set those parameters first to say, hey, this is going to take a little bit of time. But then also with that, I think we need to be smart around, playing with time, because we're in this world of knowledge, and when we're creating something as knowledge workers, you can expand it or you can subtract it. I think this kind of applies anywhere across the board, is that there is something to be said for a deadline. There is something to be said for let's take a very short deadline that's a little bit too ambitious for us, and let's push ourselves to really go for as much as we can within this short time frame. It's the idea of creativity coming from constraints. So you put this constraint, it might be slightly artificial, but you still create that, and then you can achieve amazing things within that. So, I mean, even the sort of the Google design sprint, which more traditionally would be applied to kind of a product or a service, whatever, you can still apply this sort of stuff to organizational innovation, process innovation, whatever we call it, this stuff that is internal within the organization, you can apply it. So I think that's it, sort of, being coherent, being clear that it does take time, but then sort of helping people to set these parameters and giving them stimulations All of this will help to build momentum.
Super. Thanks, Tom. Oliver, anything to add?
Yeah, for me, I I believe that honestly there's no contradiction. The challenge is for sure you need to have whatever the change is to create a kind of common burning platform for that change. Is it the purpose or is it another thing which you need to do urgently? And I think if you create that purpose for that change and you take time to engage the people, you will be in the end still much faster. And if you do that the other way around. Mm-hmm. And the example which I have is really the transformation I had the pleasure of leading in the last years. The evaluation by clear strategy and also by restructuring consultants actually had foreseen a completely different timeline, much longer in a traditional way and also much more costly than we actually had. We didn't spend a third of the money they had and we revamped dramatically good in terms of also new orders because the customers got the feel of it. After the people got a completely different feel, the sales team worked differently, the offers which we made to customers were really a different thing. The innovation we drove in collaboration ways was different. And what I think is it starts a bit slower, but then once you have the power behind, it all bypasses a traditional transformation, which you would do without that proper engagement by far. Mm-hmm. And even in this super urgent situation of financial distress, in a restructuring situation, we choose to do that with the engagement path and came out much better. Again, it was like years ago, lean manufacturing, with my background, people before lean always said you have either you have productivity or you have quality. You cannot have both. And we know that is not true. And here for me, it's that same point. Once you get the team behind, you get the full engagement, you get actually both. Because people have much more capability than in today's traditional organizations are used. Once you get the power of them all behind that and you have them in a kind of a momentum, where everybody carries and contributes and feels appreciated for his contribution, what your task as leaders is to coordinate, to stimulate, and also make sure that especially at the beginning of this process is that there is success. Yeah. Because the success at the beginning, meeting milestones, meeting important pilots in the right way, will stimulate all the other ones, and the momentum which is generated is going to be a movement. You have to support that by an enormous wave of communication. You have to communicate all the time, and at the beginning, I believe it's the task of the leaders. Sooner or later, when the movement starts and gets bigger, all the movement's participants can then start communicating, and the leader can go in the background. So it's leading from the front at the beginning and moving during that movement more and more towards the back. And then the nice thing is, the movement is the company. And again, it's a transition which is continuing. And then you only need to collect, you need to really steer and guide and support the team. And the role changes completely into coach and guidance from the back.
I love that image that you created, Oliver. It's like our role is to kind of curate the movement, but it becomes something that is actually over time initiated by the company itself. Maybe as much as I'd love to keep going, just in terms of time, maybe if each of you could do a little bit of a wrap up, just really what would your recommendations be for organizations going on a transformational journey to becoming more purposeful, either particularly with mobilizing employees or any other insights you want to share?
For me, clearly, again, as I said that initially, I think it's understanding the business. If you have not a startup, but if you have an existing business, I think you need to really understand all stakeholders' interests and all stakeholders' situation. What is the owner thinking? Where is he at? What has been happening in the past? What are his expectations? What would be an opportunity for him? What is it with the employees in the same way? Where are opportunities they see they could never realize? Where are frustration points? What is it what they have been stuck up and held up? What are the talents? What are the strengths which you have in the organization? Why has it been there for so long? Same thing on the supplier side, same thing on the community. You need to really understand more of the community around you. And in the end, with all of them, I think you need to shape that purpose. You need to find out how can you actually drive that company out of potentially a red ocean environment into blue ocean, or how can you actually bring some offerings to customers which are based on the capabilities you have inside or in your supplier structure, which can make really a significant difference. And once you have this, so again, listening a lot, shaping that together, then you have a story and you have a purpose. And from then on, actually, you can start communicating the major parts of the transformation based on the input. And the nice thing is, again, if people recognize that they have been asked and that a part of what they have been said is reflected in that story, you automatically have a beginning engagement from the start.
Beautiful. Tom, closing thoughts, comments, advice.
Closing thoughts, but Oliver just nailed it just again. But, no, but I think any organization can think of their relationship to purpose. I mean, it's complex, but there's at least two sides to it. One is the purpose discovery, is what is our purpose, and that working through that definition. And I love what Oliver has already said in terms of, in order to find that, you need to look deeply internally, look at your employees, look back to your history. If you're an organization that has a bit of a history, normally you find that even if a purpose isn't defined, there is something in the air that's there. It might be called something else. It might be there in the mission. It might be there in the values, but you know, it's not a vacuum. It already exists to a certain extent. So trying to find that, and in this process of defining it, looking internally, but also looking externally as well. And then hopefully it's in this sort of beautiful match between the internal and the external that we discover our unique purpose. I'm a big believer that purpose can be a differentiator. It's exactly in that sort of point of connection between the internal and the external that we find something that's uniquely ours. But then once we've got that, it's a question of activation. And again, I think increasingly large amounts of organizations get the initial idea of having a purpose, but it's how do we activate it? How do we implement it? And I think that's the major challenge for so many organizations, of taking that purpose and living it, putting it into the strategy, putting it into the culture. And it's a question, it's a big question, but obviously leadership play a fundamental role within that. And maybe my closing thought would be, the leadership sort of need at the individual level to connect with it and to have that coherence and that authenticity, because nobody can give any guarantee of what's going to happen on a positive way. On a negative way, we can guarantee that if the leadership are not involved, if the leadership are not authentic, if they're not coherent, it's definitely not going to happen. So making sure that at some sort of powerful personal leadership level that is there, that's deeply implemented, it gives you the chance to start to amplify and activate in a more deep way throughout the whole organization.
Great tips. I thank you both. I would just add quickly, because I can't help myself, one thing you both really emphasized for me, and a big takeaway or reminder from this conversation is, again, just the value of people, and that organizational transformation shouldn't be something that happens to people. How do we make sure that we empower them to be agents of this transformation? And both of you really brought that home to me. It's been a pleasure and a great learning experience for me to talk to you both. And thank you very much for your time and all of your expertise.
Thank you.
Great, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.